Learn from this engineer the mistakes you're making while building your fire you don't even realize to consider. This video is intended for fireplaces. This is kind of just a fun video I'm putting together. I absolutely love fires. I love burning fires during the holidays, cold nights, all that fun stuff. I have a passion for it. I have a formal degree in engineering and I think about the best way to do things constantly, so I'm sharing my fire tips with you. This is not going to be the same thing as what you would do for a wood stove. This is going to be to build a pretty fire that's fun and festive, not so much to prioritize generating heat or the other things, but keep an eye out for future videos, because knowing how to produce good long burning heat dwelling fires in a wood stove is also extremely important, especially when we're talking about living off the land. The first step is collecting your bounty. There are 4 categories of fireplace wood sizes. The first is kindling. This is like the size of a pencil and smaller. This one's probably on the larger side. This is what we're going to use to get the fire started. It's really just there to be small, catch early, and be that initial burst. The next size would be our starter sticks, which are the size of basically a pencil up to kind of the width of a ruler. Something along this size here. We're going to want a good 6 to 9 of these as a key component to getting our fire off to a great start with a strong bed of coals. Nextly, we have building branches, which are ruler to small newspaper sizes. Now, this is going to be the intermediary. This is something I like to have in addition to just my initial batch, but also to continue building coals as maybe bigger logs are taking longer to burn. Maybe you have a higher water content than is ideal and you need smaller logs to continue to produce heat. This is great for that purpose. Lastly would be our logs. So these are going to be your kind of standard fireplace log, maybe a 1/6 or an 1/8 of your round, depending on the side of it. They come in a lot different sizes and shapes. I personally like to also use these as my foundation, and we'll get into that a little bit later. The amount you need of each is dependent on the size of your fireplace and fire. Use your wood carrier as a way to divide and gauge the amount you need for each. You need enough kindling to create 3 levels. Kindling should be bone dry. Its purpose is to take the energy from the fire starter and ramp it up. A handful of kindling should allow 3 levels to start. Kindling. Next, you'll need to produce your starter sticks, which will take the weak and quick burning flame from the kindling and grow the heat source and size. These are also critical for producing a strong bed of coals, which is the key to any great fire. For these, I'll create enough for 3 levels, which is typically 6 to 9 sticks. Again, these are going to be between the size of a pencil and a ruler. Now in that split, there's already a crack in this particular log, and I got what will make awesome kindling. So when you have something handed to you like that, don't force it. No round pegs and square holes. Just use it for the best product you can. Now, with something like this, when I see a shape of that nature, I see a starter stick in the middle and kindling on the outside. This right here will split perfectly and split off. I also want to split my logs in a way where they're as square or rectangular as possible, because I'm going to utilize the cabin style of log building, and having those not be triangular will not only allow me to build a fire in a more stable way, but it'll also allow the fire to decay in a way that I want it to, and I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to the fire building phase. Third are the building branches. These are essentially the big brother to the starter sticks. They're also critical to a strong bed of coals. They will amplify the heat and energy your starter sticks are spreading, and will be the main fuel to get your fire to a sustainable level. Think of this as kind of the foundation to your coal bed. We're going for square or rectangular blocks that are kind of the size of a small newspaper. With a shape like this, it would make a ton of sense to knock this guy down, make a kindling for later, but also square up my block a bit. Lastly, the logs. These are not as much to grow and power your fire as they are to corral and retain your heat. You will likely want to mix in a few building branches along with your logs throughout the day and night in order to maintain a strong bed of coals. Those logs will break down quicker, they'll form coals quicker, they'll help to power those bigger logs, and the water content, the dryness in your wood, that will definitely dictate this as well. For my logs, I'm typically not doing a ton of splitting. Something like this is great. If they come to a point, I'm going to take that point and I'm going to chop it off and create either a building block or a smaller piece. Now to get started, I use 2 logs as a foundation. This retains the heat, allows a built-in foundation to form from the start, and most importantly, gives my fire starter ample oxygen and room to do its thing. So essentially, log here, log there, void in the middle. Now that void is where I'm going to place my fire starter, and once that fire starter, which I use newspaper, is all burnt up, I'll either have coals dropping in there or I'll intentionally fill that with good coal logs. This is where you separate the men from the boys in fire making, is we're going to actually plan out and control the way that this fire breaks down as it's burning and losing its actual, foundational properties, or whatever the term would be. So what I'm going to do is, in my house, the way that our couch and our seating is set up in our living room, which, by the way, this is obviously my home. This is not what I would be doing in my off-grid cabin with a wood stove where I'm looking to build as much heat as I can, and or at least the longevity and consistency of heat and all that. This is just for fun. This is just to enjoy. This is for more home living. So we've created this void where I put my fire starter. I use newspaper because it's ample and I'm at home here. It's a good one that works for me. And that's going to allow a lot of oxygen to get into that starting phase, and it's also going to allow a cavity for all of our coals and things that are dropping down and burning to fall into. That's really what's going to create a great coal bed, which is the most important thing for any of these fires. Now when it comes to planning and being proactive and determining how this fire is going to break down, for me, I'm building it to offset to the right and back. That's what just gives us the best view of the fire here, the way our couch is arranged. So what that means for me with this foundation is I'm going to pick my biggest, wettest log, or at least the log that I believe is going to burn the slowest and be the last to break down out of this initial, on my left side. Because that's basically going to be like a foundation wall for me, where that's going to stay there, and everything else is going to break down faster into the other direction. So I have one big log here, I have one big log there, and a void in the middle. And this next step is where we're really going to be very intentional with controlling how the fire is going to break down. And this is not just for safety, because for me, if the fire falls out of this fireplace, I mean, I do have a screen, but if it falls out, it's on my living room floor, and that's not a good thing. So we want it to fall to the back and to the right, and that way I just keep a fire that's right in the location that I want for maximum viewing at our home. So once I have this foundation in place with my 2 logs and my void in the middle, I begin to build my 3 levels of kindling. 3 levels of starter sticks and 2 levels of building branches. But is what's most important, and I factor it's overlooked in planning and how the fire is going to decompose as the wood loses its integrity. So as I was saying before, when we're building this fire, we want to think about this almost as a demolition planning. We're going to build the fire in such a way that it drops and moves and falls where we want it to, in my case, to the right and to the back. Obviously, we never want it to fall forward or outside of our safe, contained fireplace or fire pit. Now, to control it, we're very selective and precise in the size of the wood, and we're paying attention to how dry it is so that we can get a feel for how quick it will burn. We want to use the thickest and strongest pieces in the areas that we don't want the fire to fall, and the thinner, drier, quicker to burn on the sides we do. So we want big, strong pieces on the front, and in my case on the left, and smaller stuff that's going to burn faster in those other right and back side, because that's what's going to break down fast. That's also why the levels being fairly similar in size is very important, because we don't want stuff falling from a top and left and doing janky stuff and getting out of control. This way the weight of the top forces the lower levels to fall and break, and we're designing for the fire to fall where we want it to and lean in the directions that we want it to. The other thing that I always do is arrange them by size, because I'm literally going to just at this point grab my kindling. This is one of my thicker, stronger pieces of kindling, so I'm going to lay that directly on the front of this setup here, because I do want that to be one of the last things that breaks apart and falls through. Now I'm also going to put the second strongest behind it and the third strongest on the back, just so that I don't have the back completely fall out, but it should fail before any of these others do. So at this point, I'm just going to put as much of the thinnest kindling in the way I just described in 2 layers right below my initial fire starter. Again, this is another big kindling piece, so I'm going to put it on this left side and some of these smaller ones over there, so that we're continuing to plan our fire and the way it's going to decompose and demolition itself. Now we also want these to be very thin and dry, so that just the flame of a newspaper or whatever fire starter you're using catches those, and then on, where now we're going to use our next size up. Again, focusing on my biggest piece in that size range in the front, my second biggest in the back, and filling these in. So there's 1 layer. I'm going to have 2 layers. And I have a couple extra kindling. I like to, if I have spares, I'll place those in the middle, because they do help continue that fire burning if it's starting to get stagnant in the very startup process. So we have 2 layers of kindling, 2 layers of our starter sticks. You could go 3. I have a few extras here. I certainly could go 1 extra layer. And then our building branches will be that next step. So just like the others, I'm going to put my biggest on the front, my second biggest on the back, and then in the middle will be the smaller pieces. I'm going to end up today doing 2 levels of this, following that same process. Now, what we have right here is a beautiful fire with a large void. We're going to light it. Our kindling is going to take off immediately. It's going to start to warm and ignite our building branches, or starter sticks, I should say. Then our building branches will continue to warm and fire from there. And we're going to get a bunch of those falling down early for a coal bed, with the others following several minutes after. And then we'll funnel everything in here, have a strong bed of coals. And once the first basically 4 or 5 levels start to fall down and burn and create our coal bed, that's when I'm going to add larger branches on top. And I'm also going to, because I have such a large void here, I'm going to use some basically building branch size to actually put in my coal bed to add additional fuel for the coal bed, and not just these skinny little branches here. The last thing I like to do, depending on the day and the reason that I'm having the fire, is I will put 1 very large log on the top. Usually I'll do this with one that I think is going to be a big challenge to burn, or it might be wet, or it might just be something that I'm going to integrate later. If I put it at the top at the beginning, that tends to dry it out and allow it to be a replacement for one of our logs later on the road. But for this fire, and for a perfect fire, I would not start with that. I would build this fire. I would add 2 to 3 more levels of those building branches once these start to decay, and I would add a few very dry building branch size logs into that void as the fire grows. All right, we have our fire built. We have a few extra starter stick size logs that I can throw in that void once we get going. So now it's nothing left to it but to do it. Also, one thing I think about every time I light my fire is make sure your flue is open. We have enough fires here where I actually don't close the flue here, but obviously you don't want that open. So as you can see, the newspaper does a great job. It's getting all that kindling going. I don't know how much you guys can actually hear, but it's definitely igniting the kindling. We're seeing flames go up to our top level. And as I was trying to explain before, this is one of my strongest kindling branches, so that's going to support the front for as long as it possibly can. Most all of this other kindling should burn and drop down and start our coal bed. And when that's ready to burst, that next level will just sink down, and we'll basically be just dropping this down just like a demolition. And once we get our first, I'd say 4 or 5 levels burnt and down, that's when we're going to add more to the top. That's where I'm also going to add some building branch size to add to the bottom, to add to coals. And actually, with this being a very deep void, that's one thing we can do now. Now that the fire starter is burnt, I want to add a little bit of fuel here to help those initial coals burn as we're dropping those embers down from everything else. So I'm going to basically seed my coals with some of the medium-sized building branches. As you can see, it's starting to get kindling dropping down. My small little starters are igniting on the bottom. Now I could go and stuff more fuel in there. I can also just let it break down from the top down. It kind of depends on what you're going after, what your timeline is. But from here, this is the start of a perfect fire. All right, did you guys catch that? This is our first kindling piece. It's dropped down, and because we planned accordingly, we had the next level supporting it. This process will continue just like that, and we're now gonna just help to dictate a bit more by shifting the weight of logs, but this is a perfect start. All of this is going to be our coal bed. We want to continue to build sizes like this, and so we have a very strong coal bed. And then after that, we will put on some larger logs, which will be our long-term sustainability of our fire. So I've got the foundations of my coal bed. And now I have a major building block that'll last me much more than an hour. And I'm just gonna basically place it where its center of gravity is right where I want it to fall. And with my foundation under it and my construction decomposing, that'll be a good fire. If you guys like tips and tricks like this, if you enjoy living off the land, building fires, generating your own energy, all those great things that come with self-reliance and independence, then like, follow, subscribe. I'm trying to build a community. I love comments. I will be featuring our comments. I want to be involved in future videos. If you have tips or tricks of your own, I know what I'm doing, but I don't know everything. And so feel free to make this a forum of conversation, a community of self-reliant, outdoorsy, living off the land people. So please like, subscribe, follow, and comment.